Thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully we have a couple more people who are signing on right now. Welcome to the RVAgreen 2050 Environment Working Group meeting. I appreciate everybody being here on a Wednesday afternoon since this isn't our usual meeting time. And we're just going to go ahead and jump right into things since we have a packed agenda of mostly discussion time for you all. So I'm going to share my screen. And get my chat together. Okay, so I'm going to put a link in the chat to our shared Google Drive folder for this meeting. I'll be sharing specific links as needed during the meeting, and let me just show you this. So this is the link I just shared. It has everything that we're going to be using for today's meeting, just if you want to reference this as sort of a landing place, including the slides and other materials. First, I'm going to do probably 20 minutes or so of some presentation. Then we are going to get straight into our activity, which will take the vast majority of today's meeting time. Our objectives for today are to continue the work that we started at the last meeting, where we were beginning to draft strategies for the RVAgreen 2050 action plan. What we're going to be doing today is taking the language and ideas and all of the comments and stars and X's that you all provided at the last activity and refining language, and also going back to the equity screening tool that we worked on with you all back in January and applying that to our strategies to make sure that they are inclusive and equitable and relevant for the entire community. So we'll get into more of what that will look like in a second. Just overview, as always, here are the group's ground rules. I think for today, because we're going to be working primarily in smaller breakout groups on developing shared content, just be sure to allow for people to have time to talk during our activity. And then again, just a little bit of overview before we jump into some of the new-ish content for today. This is the current draft structure for RVAgreen 2050. We've shown this to a few times now, so just to reiterate that today we are concentrating pretty much exclusively on the strategy level content. These strategies are actionable programs and policies that will help us meet our objectives, and we will review what those are in a few minutes. To provide a little bit of big picture, I guess, this is the overview of the entire RVAgreen 2050 process that we've shown before. And what I wanted to point out is that we're reaching one of our sort of key milestones in the process. We are coming up on April, obviously, and what we're going to be doing in April is bringing out to the entire Richmond community all of the work that you all and the other working groups and the roundtable have done since we started meeting back in October and November. So this will be the draft vision, pathways, objectives, and strategies. So right now, we are going to be refining strategies today, and we will have one more meeting to get ready to take all this content out to the community. And then you all will be back at it in our working groups over the summer with a few meetings to continue that work. Getting a little more specific in terms of the process so far, this is just a reminder, and for anyone who wasn't able to join us at our last meeting, we've been, this is the sort of workflow for our strategy drafting process. What we started with at our last meeting were several what we were calling inputs to the RVAgreen 2050 process. This included technical information, as well as examples from best practices and experts in other cities. And with that information, we combined that with a sort of starting point for drafting strategies, which included the Richmond 300 master plan, as well as your ideas from the meeting before that. And what we asked you to do last time was brainstorm your ideas for strategies under our 3 objectives and consider this sort of preliminary checklist And the output of that meeting, of our last meeting, was a set of actual draft strategies and ideas. And then what our team internally has done between our last meeting and now is taken those ideas as well as your comments, additional feedback, whether that was on the slides or the gigantic spreadsheet that we shared with you in the form of stars or X's or comments or any number of things. And started to clean up that list of strategies. We also looked at where we could combine ideas that had some overlap in terms of strategies. We identified potential gaps where we saw that maybe a strategy needed to be added, and we'll get into the specifics of where we ended up with that sort of staff review. But so we've done that over the last week and a half or so, and then where we are starting today is with a revised list of strategies for your input and refinement. So we have 2 asks for you today during our activity and breakout groups that I'll get more into detail on. But our ask essentially is to take this revised list that we as staff have come up with based on all of that previous input and do 2 things. One is to make sure that at least at this point, our strategies are actually meeting our definition of a strategy. So these are, again, actionable programs and policies that will help us meet our objectives. They're ambitious and realistic. Under our SMARTY framework, we have a couple other elements, one being measurable, which is referring to like a timeline with each strategy, a metric with each strategy, and then time bound, which is the timeline element. We'll be getting more into that in the summer. So right now, we just want to make sure that the strategies are actual strategies. And I'll have some examples of what that means in a minute. And then the other ask for today is to apply the IE, or inclusive and equitable pieces of the SMARTY framework using our equity screening tool. The goal of today's meeting is to have a refined list of strategies, which is then going to go for review in the next week to city departments and city leadership, as well as our Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable. So this is just a broad overview of where we've been. Today, we are again just refining the strategy language and applying the equity screening tool. And then at our next meeting in about 3 weeks, you will have the opportunity to review the input from the roundtable and city staff and departments and incorporate that into the strategies, which will then in April go out to the wider community for input. So the 2, I'm going to sort of give an overview of the 2 considerations or inputs for today's activity. One is our community priorities, which we've talked a lot about in previous meetings, but we wanted to provide some more specific examples of what we're trying to do in terms of relating what we heard the community wants and needs to what we are drafting in terms of climate action and resilience strategies. So just as a reminder, this was the work primarily of our community engagement coordinator, Kendra Norell, going out to different organizations and neighborhood groups and individuals, leaders in the community, particularly neighborhoods and communities that are on the front lines of climate change last summer, and asking them what their just general sort of priorities are outside of climate change. And these were the things we heard. We'll get into the specifics of what each of these 7 community priorities means with the equity tool. But what we want to do with these priorities generally is make sure that we are incorporating them across the RVAgreen 2050 plan to make it more equitable and inclusive, and also more relevant for the community, so that we can have true community buy-in and ownership of the climate action and resilience strategies that we're working on. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples that we came up with of how we can connect community priorities with climate action and resilience, just in case this is helpful to anyone. So one area that we heard feedback on from the community over last summer was that people want more access to jobs, and particularly better paying jobs. What we see in our region generally is that there is a very small percentage of jobs that is accessible via public transportation, and accessible being like a reasonable sort of distance to take the bus, for example. In addition to that, we have about 15% of Richmond households that do not have access to a vehicle, and then another 40% or so that have access to only one vehicle. So if there's more than one working adult in the household, they might not have a vehicle to access a job to get to work. So as we think about access to jobs as a community priority, and also the fact that we are seeing increasing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation because of people driving more, we want to think about climate action and resilience strategies that can, for example, provide access to jobs via sustainable transportation modes like biking, walking, and public transit, that will help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also increasing access to jobs. As another example on the housing side, the biggest thing we heard in sort of the housing and buildings area from the community was the need for more affordable housing. And on the climate side, one element of affordable housing is an energy burden, or the amount of a household's income that they pay, that they spend on their energy and utility bills. We know that this is a factor in why people sometimes get evicted if they are, for example, needing to pay a high energy bill to keep the heat or air conditioning on to stay safe, and then they don't have enough money to, for example, pay rent or do something, pay for some other necessity. What we're seeing also in Richmond, which I'm sure you've all heard about, is that we have a very high eviction rate, and particularly in our communities where we have more people who identify as Black and African American and Hispanic and Latino. In addition, these same communities, these same people are also paying disproportionately high energy bills. This could be for many reasons. They could be because of, historic and existing discrepant or sort of like inequities in housing. People are living in less efficient, less weatherized housing, things like that. But on the solution side, if we can think about how to make housing more energy efficient, more weatherized, it will not only make it more resilient to things like extreme heat and storms, it will also provide hopefully a decrease in the amount of money that people have to spend on their energy bills, which can then provide a way for housing to be more affordable. All right, so next example is around natural environments. So this is not going to be anything that is surprising to you all. But so as you know, here in Richmond, we have a lot of overlap between where we're seeing neighborhoods that have high urban heat island effect. So they get literally hotter than other neighborhoods during things like extreme heat waves. I believe that I don't know if Jeremy's on, but there are some neighborhoods that get up to 16 degrees hotter than others, I think, here in the city of Richmond. These are also areas where we see less tree canopy and more paved surfaces. And they're also neighborhoods where we see a number of other inequities and disproportionate impacts of other factors. Thanks, Jeremy. So things like, more people experiencing health conditions that may cause them to be even more susceptible to illness because of something like extreme heat. So as we're thinking about climate action and resilience strategies, if we were to, say, concentrate on these areas first, we can achieve a lot of co-benefits through the provision of more green space, tree canopy that can contribute to better health, more beautiful neighborhoods, more access to green space, and that sort of thing. All right, and then the last example is relating to waste. One of the things that we heard from the community, again, last summer was that littering is a really big concern in a lot of neighborhoods, both in terms of just sort of neighborhood beautification, but also concerns related to safety, air and water quality, and other issues. We also know just nationally that race is actually the most significant predictor of whether a person lives near an area that might be contaminated, through its air or water or soil. And then here in Richmond, on sort of the climate action and resilience side, we do not offer services such as curbside recycling to large multifamily housing buildings. And so what we could potentially think about is on the climate action resilience side again, if we were to say expand a service like curbside recycling to these areas, it would provide not only a way for people to reduce their carbon footprint, but also potentially provide more services and facilities to cut down on issues like litter. So those are, again, just a few examples of connecting community priorities to our climate action and resilience strategies. You all work in all of these areas, so you probably have a number of other examples that could be shared, but we just wanted to provide a few. So then the second sort of input for today, if you want to call it that, is our equity screening tool, which we worked on with you all back in January. Since then, we have worked on refining the equity screening tool with the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable. The format of it, which I will provide a link to the full tool so you all can see it. It's currently in a 3-page PDF document with 7 sections that correspond to our 7 community priorities. And under each community priority, it lists 3 what we're calling priority considerations, which are the sort of top questions that we as an entire group came up with to ask ourselves as we're thinking about how we could make a strategy, a program, a policy more equitable, specifically related to that community priority. There are also some additional questions and considerations for additional context, as well as some suggested data and metrics associated with each section. And I'll show you what this looks like for a few of these areas. Just know that what we're going to concentrate on today are these priority considerations, because we don't realistically have enough time to go through the entire tool with every single strategy that we're working on drafting right now. The other sort of reminder is that the equity screening tool itself is both a product, so it's an actual document right now that people can use for a number of different things, including what we're about to do today, but it's also a process. And so it's too long, it's too much to memorize and, be able to sort of spout off, oh, well, this, is how we use our equity screening tool to think about everything that we're doing. It's really a way that we're trying to embed equity-centered thinking in the process to create this climate action and resilience plan. So I've divided up the equity screening tool into 2 parts. This first part has the community priorities that are more topical in nature, and these are the ones that we're going to concentrate with you all on today in terms of, I apologize, thinking about how we can make our strategies within the environment pathway more equitable and inclusive. So these are the community priorities of community wealth, which is all about jobs access to well-paying jobs, that sort of thing. Neighborhoods, this is about beautiful, safe, healthy neighborhoods, access to resources. On the housing and building side, this is really all about affordable housing, home ownership, among other things. And then on the health and well-being side, thinking about not just physical health, but also mental health. My dogs have a lot to say about this, obviously. And then on the sort of, and the other 3 community priorities, we're putting in a category of being more procedural in nature. These are all going to be cross-cutting across the entire RVAgreen 2050 action plan. Hold on one second. Okay, I just needed a good yell from mom to quiet down. These are the ones that are more procedural in nature. The community working group is actually going to be looking, well, is looking specifically at these to draft cross-cutting strategies for RVAgreen 2050 that will apply to all of our strategies around equitable community engagement and communication, as well as government accountability. So that's why we say for this activity, we're going to prioritize the other 4. They know, Rob, they know they're going to get it if they don't. But if you have time, feel free to move on to these in our activity today. And I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. So in a second, so you'll be able to see what I mean here. So getting more specific again into what we're actually asking y'all to do today. The first part is refining strategy language where needed to make it an actual strategy. And what I mean by that is, for example, reduce residential water consumption is not a strategy. We want to be more specific about an actionable policy or program. And so one way to take something like that idea of reducing residential water consumption and turn it into something like a strategy is to say instead, to restructure the fees and billing procedures around residential water consumption to incentivize that reduction. The second part of the activity that we're going to be doing using the equity tool is seeing where we can add elements to our strategies that will make them more inclusive and equitable and more relevant to the community by looking at our community priorities. So in the same example about reducing residential water consumption, we could think about adding an element of, for example, using clear language and graphics to communicate what all those fees and ways to reduce usage to the people who are receiving those bills. So we're not only incentivizing the reduction of water consumption, but also doing it in a way that's more accessible to the community. As another example, we could, there's this sort of general idea we've all talked about, and we've gotten more specific on, of increasing access to public parks. So making that an actual strategy could be something like establishing an annual budget for acquiring new park space. Making that an even more equitable strategy could be potentially identifying new public park space first in areas that have a higher urban heat island impact, just as examples. So that's exactly what we're going to be asking you all to do today. For our actual activity, which we'll jump into in about 5 minutes, we're going to be dividing the group. Well, you all will be dividing yourselves into breakout groups based on which objective you would like to work on. We're not going to be doing the switching of facilitators because we want to be able to concentrate on the strategies within each objective and really start to develop this refined language. So I'll go through what each objective is on probably the next slide. What we ask you to do again is go through, refine the strategy language, and then use the equity tool. So I'm going to switch my screen to the actual tool that we will be using today, which is this. And I will make this bigger so people can see. All right, so we will share this link with you if you would like to look at it, but each group will be facilitated by a member of our team throughout this process. And we have divided the what we have arrived at as revised strategies by objective. Each breakout room will concentrate on one objective and the strategies within it. The first column on this spreadsheet is the actual revised language that either you all or we have come up with. For this group, just FYI, if it's yellow, it means that well, it all came from our last meeting, but if it's yellow, then I've kind of tweaked it a little bit, and in column C, I've said why, so you can understand my thought process. What we're asking you to do for the first part of the activity is to, where needed, make these into actual strategies. So I think a lot of these are in really good shape. And then I've added some like comments and questions around particular ones that I don't think are quite at the level of what we're thinking about as a strategy. So for example, I've added in like a question here. We had a really great start of a strategy from our last meeting around ensuring equitable distribution of natural resources, but we don't have a how are we doing that to make this an actionable and strategic and realistic and ambitious. So that's sort of the first activity that you'll go through with your facilitator. And then the second part that you'll go through will be taking that revised or original strategy language, whatever you all decide on, is actually going through the equity tool in its sections. So thinking about each element, and I'll scroll over here, of the equity tool, concentrating first on the first 4 elements, these more topical ones of community wealth, housing, neighborhoods, and health, and going through each strategy literally and asking, does this strategy support, for example, community wealth? Does it create jobs? Does it provide more access to jobs? It's just a yes or no answer that you all can discuss. If the answer is yes, we would like you to say how. The facilitator will be taking notes on this, so this is more of a discussion and activity for you all. If the answer is no, ask yourselves, is there an opportunity to do so? So for this first one, expand the city's Adopt a Street program, etc. Does that have the opportunity to create jobs? Because it's not explicitly stated within that strategy. That'll be something for you all to discuss and decide. It's not necessary that every single strategy supports every single community priority. That would be both impossible and just unrealistic to try to achieve in today's activity. But we want to, again, just start to embed this way of equity-centered thinking and making our climate action and resilience strategies more relevant to the community. So that is the activity for today. I am happy to answer questions about what the ask is. What I'll do first is put the link to these slides in the chat. What we're going to ask you to do is actually, Kendra or Wendy, do you mind putting the link in if you have it? If not, I'll put it in a second. What we're going to ask you to do is navigate to slide 20 and literally just put your name under the objective that you would like to work on today. You will most likely be in that one room for the whole time, but if your group finishes your objective, you can come back to the main room and join another discussion group. What else? Just going through the objectives as they are now, which you all had some feedback on the objective language, so I've incorporated that at this point. Objective 1 is making sure all residents have the opportunity to engage with healthy natural resources, spaces, and biodiversity. With that objective, you will be in a breakout room with Kendra. Objective 2 is about resilience to extreme heat and drought. Still, nothing has changed about that. And so that one will be with me. But with that one, there's a potential to add a new objective based on y'all's feedback, as well as our review of some best practices with climate action planning around air quality and sequestration. So what I'm going to do is invite folks to join for the discussion, which will primarily focus on objective 2, because we have a lot of draft strategies for that right now to go through. But then if we have time, we will also go into this potential new objective as well. So that'll be for both of those. And then finally, objective 3 is about resilience to extreme precipitation and flooding. And with that group, you'll be with Dawn. So any question, and then if you can't access the Google Slides or you're just having difficulty with any of this, feel free to put in the chat which objective you'd like to work on, or just shout it out and we will sign you up. If you don't have a preference, you will just be randomly assigned to a group where we need people. So any questions about what we're going to be doing? And Jeremy, I'll put thanks Wendy for putting that in. Okay. And if you all don't have questions, feel free to sign up for your objective of choice and then take a 5-minute break. Let's reconvene at 3:36 when we will jump into our breakout rooms. All right.
Brandon had a quick emergency, so you've got me.
I saw you.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I'm glad you're here.
Okay.
Brianne,
All
how
right.
And for Jen, I need to call. I see she put a phone number in there. Am I supposed to call her on my cell phone or something to connect her? Or what?
I think she was doing that so we could label her phone, which I already did.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, it looks like someone's going through and typing names, which is awesome.
Sorry, that's Jen. I'm very behind the scenes, but here.
Awesome.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'll put you in your phone in the same room.
Thank you. I would appreciate that a lot.
All right, and Mary, we will put you in objective 1. I need some more people with me in objective 2/4.
what is that again, Brianne?
So objective 2 are the strategies around resilience to extreme heat and drought. And then we will also, if we have time, look at a potential new objective around air quality and carbon sequestration / capture. This is an area I'm not super well versed in, so it's going to be something that we will work on together in terms of drafting some strategies. But it looks like right now we have somewhat even groups, so you all just feel free to sign up for whichever ones you prefer.
And were you able to make me a co-host or something?
Yes.
So I can do. Okay, thank you.
All right, I will pause this recording. I'm going to share the link to a couple things. First link is going to be the equity screening tool. And again, all of this stuff is in that folder that I shared earlier. But these are a couple specific things that will be helpful to our activity. So this first link is the equity screening tool, the full document. This, if you're able to have it open in another window while we're going through the activity, that would probably be helpful. Just so that as we're going through those columns for the equity screening tool, you can reference that as needed for what specific community priorities entail which considerations. And then I'll also share the link to the spreadsheet, which I'm going to be sharing on my screen as well. But if you'd like to take a look at it, that's totally fine with me. So let me get this set up. All right. Let me move this. All right, so here's our super spreadsheet for today. Just to orient everybody to this in case you want to take a look after the meeting or anything like that. This is a spreadsheet that we have made for our team to start to organize all of the content being drafted for RVAgreen 2050 by each of the working groups. And so we have a tab for each of our working groups, which is organized by their objectives, and then the strategies, which are in varying states of being drafted right now. We also have a couple of other things that I'll point out just real quickly. One is this first tab, which is a guide, and this can be something that can be useful during today's activity, potentially. It's just the structure that we've been through a couple times for RVAgreen 2050 and what each level of content means. Then we have a quick explanation of our inputs, the SMARTY framework that we're going to be working on today, particularly on the strategic, ambitious, and realistic categories, and then an overview of the equity screening tool. And then the other thing I'll point out is that we also have a tab for a glossary. And this is obviously not finished in any way, but this is something we started at the beginning of the process, just in terms of capturing terms and concepts that people were using in the drafting process that they or someone else thinks that we would want to define in some part of RVAgreen 2050 to make it more accessible to people who might not understand the language or a certain term or something like that. So for today, we are going to be on objective 2 under the environment pathway. And again, as a reminder, objective 2 is all about increasing our communities and our natural environment's resilience to heat. Something is wrong with my freezing of panes. So hold on one second. Oh no, how do I do this? I don't know if any of you all are Google Sheets wizards, but this is, there we go. Okay, so we'll just start here. We have a fair number of draft objectives under this strategy. These are all things that came up during our last meeting. And what I've done is tried to, again, combine where possible different ideas to form one strategy. Also added in, additional detail or pointed out where we might want additional detail, that sort of thing. The first thing we're going to do is just go through the entire list of strategies. We'll start with the highlighted ones first and consider any changes that we want to make to the language to make this more strategic, ambitious, and realistic, part of our SMARTY framework. So this first one, just to dive right in, is to develop an urban forest master plan focusing on places with less tree canopy first. And then as you can see, there are a number of sub points or bullets to this strategy. I sort of combined what I thought what might be elements of this urban forest master plan, but some of these, and I want your feedback on this, might be specific strategies in themselves. So that's why I highlighted this. I'll give you all a minute to read through this, but I think some of these can stay under the details of an urban forest master plan, but some we might want to pull out. So just feel free to shout out when you're ready if you have any thoughts on that.
Brianne, would it be possible to zoom in a little bit?
Yes, let me make this.
Been staring at a screen too long.
Yeah, how's that? Is that okay?
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay. If you'd like, I don't know if you want, you can also open this on your screen if you want to look at it, and I'll be directing where we're looking each time.
So Brianne, I guess on the first, just thinking about like this places with less tree canopy first, there's maybe the urban forest, and this is something I've been thinking about, is like figuring out where plantable space exists. It's like, just because there are fewer trees, that means it's somewhat counterbalanced by an expanse of impervious. So do we run the risk of not missing the appropriate metric off the bat if it's just like a lack of tree canopy? It's just a question for everyone else.
And I guess, I mean, sort of piggybacking on that, so, Southside Relief is looking at a master plan for, right, how do we balance the whole sort of community input specifically around where trees are going and how they're going, and right, I mean, this feels very good from a technical standpoint, but I don't know that just overlaying where there are no trees and where it's hot is enough of a focus in terms of where people actually, and you may not get them where you, but I mean, I think that voice should be included, right?
Okay.
Somehow.
Do you think there could be a development? We don't have to come up with the precise language today, but
well, I mean, and part of the other trigger for me is include public education. I mean, maybe what we want to do is look at public engagement, right? Look at, community focus kind of thing. I don't know. Sometimes when we talk about education in these spheres, it feels like we know and they don't, and that's not always a fun, kind of place to be. So
Yeah.
anyhow.
Yeah, so maybe there's, to both of your comments, maybe there's just some sort of more robust criteria, set of criteria, or some process thing that is how we actually prioritize space, where the focus is. So we don't have to name that right now, but maybe that's something we could potentially do, sort of like with the Mayor's Green team, working with the community to come up with criteria that then gets applied to identify, here are the areas of focus, something like that.
Yeah, there was a recent thing that a project on Cliff Avenue that included like handouts, like postcards that showed what like a tree looks like upon planting 10, 20, and 30 years in the future. And like that kind of, do you want a tree? Yes or no? And which kind would you like? Kind of that level of, choice is or like, yeah, maybe I'm just trying to figure out how we can put projects or tactics that have been used in other urban forest master plans.
Yeah, I mean, that's street trees, but I'm not sure that when we're talking about canopy, we're just getting to, right? I mean, so who wants to trade grass for trees? Who wants to trade asphalt for trees? How do we have those kinds of conversations? Because in a lot of places, a lot of heat, as you know, right? A lot of heat impacted places, that's what's there, right? There's either right asphalt or grass or turf, and neither one of which does a very good job of, in Gilpin it's asphalt, Hillside it's turf. Neither one of them does a very good job of managing heat.
I love how you, Brand, have reconciled the kind of, not a top down, but a kind of, I'm thinking Jeremy's viewpoint of like a satellite based mapping of like, where the hot temperatures are, or where there are possibilities to plant trees, and Rob's like community mapping kind of approach from the ground up. And I appreciate what you're saying, is we can get into those details kind of later. But I don't want Rob's other comment to be lost about the public education, maybe public engagement being a better way to phrase that, rather than public education. I like put that. I think that's important to capture.
Mm-hmm. And is that potentially separate from this urban forest master plan strategy? We do have, so objective 1 within environment is all about sort of increasing opportunities for the community to engage with the natural environment. So that will be sort of cross-cutting, but is there something particularly, let's say on this one, related to urban forest management or tree canopy around public education and engagement that we want to pull out here? Or are we okay with just sort of leaving it as an element to include in this master plan strategy?
My guess is public engagement will be in all strategies at some many strategies.
Yeah.
At some level. So that's a good question, whether or not you want to include it in many of them or have it separate. I think it's hard to include in them each.
Mm-hmm. I think if there's something specific that we want to like call out and say, well, definitely with trees, we want to make sure this element of public engagement is brought forward. I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure how to say this. There are a lot of folks thinking about trees in our community right in through here. So, I mean, I could see the maintenance and, the partnering with Dominion and other things like that kind of being a separate lane in some ways. Like, what do you do? Right? How do you plan for what to do, and how do you plan for what you got, kind of stuff. I don't know. And, but, there's also I mean, on the economic, right? I mean, we're seeing the possibility for jobs and job creation in this lane as well, right? I mean, right now, it's not huge, but it may be larger. So I'm not sure whether that becomes a call out or if it's just be clear in the plan that we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I just want to throw something out for consideration. Just a thought at this point in the process, knowing we have in the summer after spring engagement, April engagement to refine strategies and talk about implementation. Just listening, kind of trying to be objective, seems like a lot of what we're talking about kind of is creeping into implementation and a lot more details. And just thinking about where we are now in the process and wanting to get through all of these strategies and then apply the equity screening tool today at our meeting, is I'm wondering if we want to just take a little bit of a step back and kind of up a layer and think about this particular item as it relates to the rest of the strategies at this objective, and kind of think about, so you have this one, and then I was just glancing through, you have another one about tree canopy on private property, tree canopy on city property. This is talking about a urban forest master plan. So I'm just wondering about, do we need 3 separate strategies focused on trees? And if so, is it tree canopy on public property, private property? Can all of those be wrapped into one about a master? So thinking more at that level right now than getting into some of these more finer details that we can flesh out later. Just a thought that might be more helpful so we can make sure we cover all of the strategies today and apply the equity tool.
Yeah, and I was about to suggest we move on, come back if needed, because of what y'all are talking about, particularly with things like jobs, are brought out in a couple of other strategies as well. This was a big one though, so I wanted to make sure that we hit this because I think half of the comments from the group last time were about trees. So I just wanted to make sure we were capturing those. So for now, let's keep going. We'll come back to this. Just because we were just talking about jobs, I did want to point out that the next strategy down under this objective is about increasing, and then maintenance was the other really big theme that we heard from last time. Increasing city capacity for maintenance of existing resources that enhance extreme heat and drought resilience by increasing budget, hiring more staff, including through a workforce development program, providing training and engagement opportunities to increase buy-in and decrease turnover. This is one of those that encompasses sort of a lot of components, but I think that's just getting into maybe, Rob, what you were starting to talk about. So any thoughts on refining this one at this point? All right. I'm going to come back then to 24.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
What are the resources there? Increase city capacity for maintenance of existing resources.
Resources that enhance extreme heat and drought resilience. So I think we'd have to define that in maybe the implementation part, but to me that's trees, green spaces, like both public parks, and if there are others that we want to incorporate there, I don't know what that is right now, plantings, things like that.
And on this one, the one thing that I might say is including partnerships, right? As opposed to just laying it all on city staff. I have the feeling that as we're moving forward, there's going to be opportunities for public-private connection here. And I don't know exactly what to, how to say that, but
yeah,
just did. So there's that.
I like it. Okay.
And I'm sorry, I'm looking at all of these points, and I feel like there has to be something overarching that has like a routine assessment, maybe an annual every 2 years or so of where we are with each of these strategies, especially with the urban tree canopy. And I think like further up, we were talking about creating the tree assessment. So it could be like centralizing that for those same partnerships or different groups who can do those same, like instead of like having duplicate efforts, just to make sure that it's all pretty streamlined.
Thanks, Wafame. Just so you all know, the column all the way to the right was for comments. So that's where I'm saving these sort of overarching ideas. Okay, so I want to keep us moving. As Alicia pointed out, there are 2 additional strategies that are pretty broad in terms of increasing both tree canopy, but also green space and these are in 2 different strategies. So in row 26 here, it's on city property, and then just, this is not intentional in any way, but just in the way that I was organizing everything, row 30 is on private property. The reason I separated this, at least for right now, is because there were several very specific suggestions for city property versus private property. And then I was trying to put more of the planning elements in the plan, the master plan strategy, and put more of the implementation elements here. I'm not sure if that is actually how it ended up, but that's what I was going for. So under, again, just row 26 for right now, increased tree canopy and green space on city property. We had several really specific ideas about different ways to do this. One question I had was, there was a suggestion at the last meeting about taking the RVA clean water plan goal of increasing tree canopy on city property by, oh, sorry about that. I don't know what's happening, by 5%. Oh, good, someone fixed my thing. And someone said that's not ambitious enough. So do we want to have a higher goal than 5%? Right now, again, we're not getting as much into things like metrics. That will be in the implementation sort of phase of our planning process over the summer. But any thoughts on that would be welcome, as well as any thoughts on how to make this a more actionable strategy if we want it to stand on its own.
So I think about,
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Rob.
The only thing I would say is if we're going to put it out for folks to I don't know what 5% versus 10% looks like, how you would make that metric assessment, right? It would be useful in your earlier comment about trying to create language and visible things that help people to make decisions and think clearly. In this one, I don't know, right? And I doubt that if I don't know, I mean, I'm not super smart, but lots of other people probably don't either.
Well, that's actually like at the heart of a lot of discussion around like, well, what is actually the real tree canopy percentage for the city? Because you hear like 40% or depending on the data set that you use. So I would say like a tree canopy assessment has to, like, part of that being its own strategy is like just really codify the method by which we assess tree canopy percentages in the city. Like, and if that that is a great strategy in the sense of that would force the Richmond Tree Commission or whatever it is to then make that kind of, or re-estimate citywide tree canopy percent using updated, imagery. And I'm happy to like offer thoughts on that, but
what are you like a scientist or something? What the hell?
That's like, but Rob, you're right. Like there was a thing in Richmond 300. It was like, let's get us to 60% tree canopy. And I was like, from what number of and to related to relevant, or like, so we need to set, like, that's one of the strategies that I think would be really helpful for RVAgreen would be to make that, because then we can say from the baseline that we set in the previous strategy, now we say for 10% increase on city property using the Canopy estimation from previous strategy or whatever.
And I really want to, I mean, aside from, throwing you under the scientist bus, I don't think that regular people understand what tree canopy is or how it's measured. And I think we're in dangerous territory when we plant all these new trees and sort of count them towards tree canopy, and we don't have a clear sense of what we've got and what the difference is between, a tree that's been here, or, I mean, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure that's in there, but I think that for, again, regular people, that would be a useful piece of data to project as we're talking about this.
Yeah. Cool. So just to keep us moving, I did put that as its own strategy up above, just on the same line as the urban forestry master plan, to keep that sort of together. Let's keep going on the strategies, and we can always come back to any specific ideas on this one. I think there's, like Alicia said, a lot of overlap between this sort of strategy idea and the one on the urban forestry master plan too. So moving on, next strategy to consider, or strategy idea, is identify depaving opportunities in areas that experience extreme urban heat. So this was one that I didn't think was quite a strategy yet.
Right. I think it's like develop an ordinance that allows for, non DPW, or, city partner organizations to depave. Like, for example, Portland, Oregon has a depave PDX group that is not part of the city government. So it's like, part of the reason we can't depave things really easily is because it gets kind of, it's just impossible to get people to do things. So we do some sort of blanket adopt ordinance language to allow for depaving projects. That's something that's achievable and allows for that kind of thing. Because as soon as we'd be able to depave, like the Carver Elementary School, it was one of those locations that Carver actually was like, we'd love to depave some of this area, but they can't. They just physically can't without a whole bunch of, red tape, as it were.
Okay.
Which for
so,
some,
Yeah. So it sounds like the opportunities exist. Like we know in some places where we want this to happen. It's just the mechanism to have it happen.
Yeah, I think so.
Rob.
That's what the Chesapeake.
Yeah. Same conversation, right? Who's we?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And I think it's really, I mean, I love the fact that Carver wanted to get rid of it. And I think we have to, somewhere in here, build in that notion of, and maybe I think we've got it as a layer, don't we? In terms of impervious surface.
Sure.
Maybe there's an impervious surface map. I mean, I'm not joking, right? I mean,
There is this impervious. It's about being able to remove it.
No, an impervious surface master plan.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in the same way that we're looking at tree cover, right? I mean, every impervious surface isn't the same thing, right? I mean, some are parking lots, some are, I mean.
I liked breaking out. So I like the idea of breaking out public and private lands for the tree canopy, right? And especially like I saw with the RVA H2O initiative, how they really focused solely almost on public lands, or at least there was, there's some things you can do. You can just, the strategies are different on public and private lands, right? And so it makes sense for trees to me, for sure. I'm trying to think if that makes sense for impervious surfaces too. Maybe it does also, because maybe you have some places that are city owned, like, or schools or something like that the city could actually work to kind of depave relatively easily. And then that's just, and then on private areas, you'd have to either incentivize or allow the owners to kind of do that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think it's also for impervious cover, it depends on existing or new is a big difference as well. So I get maybe one thing we might want to consider in this strategy is what you're talking about. Is it existing or what's new? Because much of new development is covered by more stringent regulations versus what's existing and already there. I'm assuming by the terminology, it's existing, but maybe we want to clarify that.
Yes, and I think we have, I don't want to get lost here, but I think we have a strategy related to new development, maybe, but I'll just keep the note here to include that as another consideration potentially.
And Alicia, I would consider that a friendly amendment to the impervious surface master plan, right? I mean, I think if we were looking at it from that lens, we would figure out, right, whether it was new or existing. And so.
Okay, great. Let's keep moving. I don't want to run out of time. So the next strategy, I just frankly didn't even quite know what this meant. Identify a large parcel in each city council district to set aside in the old growth forest network. I mean, it sounded good and I Googled it, but wasn't quite sure. And if y'all don't know, we can definitely ask the rest of the group, clarify where this came from. No?
I mean,
I'm not sure where it came from, but I would be almost surprised. I mean, at least what I know of Old Growth Forest Network, like I'd be almost surprised if there was a tract that met the criteria for Old Growth Forest in every city council district. So
okay.
I mean, that's just my
well, and whether, so I would say, and again, I don't have the criteria in my head, but let's just for a moment forget about whether it meets the criteria now. It could be a place that we've identified and it's like, we're not doing a damn thing and we're going to let it grow and we're going to let it be. And in 40 years, it'll be part of the old, it'll actually be old growth, right? So, I mean, I could see that being a strategy. Now, whether we want to, you know, I mean, city land, there's only however many square miles, but I mean, that's what's in my head.
Mm-hmm.
They do say in their website, they talk about every county in the United States designating. So what Rob's saying resonates with that. It's maybe setting aside place that will become over 100 years from now or whatever.
Great.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Okay, so next big one. I think this is the last big one that we have. This is the opposite side of the previous coin on city property. This is increasing tree canopy and green space on private property. Again, this was where we kind of had a mix of numerical goal suggestions as well as specific maybe implementation suggestions. If we go the route that we went on the city property side, we could group some of this under, at least the tree part, under an urban forestry master plan. But again, with private property, there are definitely different ways to do the implementation part. So would love anyone's thoughts on this sort of grouping of things.
Are you in row 31?
Yeah, 29. Sorry.
29.
29.
Okay.
Brianne, where are we here vis-a-vis Richmond 300?
So I will make in bold the specific ones that came from Richmond 300. This one and this one were specific strategies in Richmond 300.
That's kind of
I don't know if that first one about, well, revising the zoning ordinance, that's a strategy. Then I don't know. So those two came from Richmond 300. Let me just stop there.
And they do have the increase the overall canopy cover from 42 to 60%, right? Which it would go with
Yes.
master plan.
And that's also where the goal around, or sorry, strategy around an urban forestry master plan, is included in there. Some of these, so the non-bolded points here were the things that came from this working group that could potentially be rolled up into maybe that as like the overarching strategy, and then these are implementation points. We could just leave it at that.
I don't understand the first bullet, create a corporate business outreach to help them. I'm not even sure. To help them understand how to maintain trees around parking lot. Who's that? Who's the them? Is that private property, like landowners?
I think private property
Okay.
owners, yeah. Like business parks and.
I mean, I think there's probably a word missing, right? Outreach strategy to help them.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, we'll keep going, but the note, the differential between incentivize and require, I think is pretty key here, right? And we're building a lot of really crappy stuff right now when it comes to green space.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that incentivization is going to be enough to halt that. I mean, we're building a lot of really, and density is lovely. And if we're going to build more of it and we're not forcing folks to include green space, we're going to be in trouble. I mean, we're already in trouble in Scott's Addition and a bunch of other places, right? But I mean, that pattern is showing up in Manchester. It's showing up, any place where. So paying attention to intentionally incorporating green space in design of, multi-unit, whether it's housing or corporate or whatever, I think is important to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that grows up. I mean, like the zoning ordinance to increase the parking screening requirements, but not like usable open, green space is like one of those things that would be critical, as part of the zoning ordinance update as well. There's like strategies like green factor scores from other cities that, as they include more public green space, they get a density bonus or something like that. And that way it's not incentivizing, we still get it, but they also, can get.
I don't mind incentives. I just don't think they're enough.
Absolutely. No, and we don't incentivize any sort of greenery right now. So that would be a critical aspect of this.
Okay. Let's keep going. I do want to say, Rob, in one of the other strategies, and I don't know if it's one for our group or it might be in the first objective, we have a strategy that was written / wherever it came from, around defining green space or whatever the term is to include things like quality, usability, like somehow coming up with something like that would then be applicable to all of this other stuff. So I just wanted to say that. But let's keep going. So, we're almost at the bottom of our list, so that's good. All right, next strategy is expand the Adopt a Tree program, which is a city program for community organizations to buy trees in bulk and commit to steward the trees. I'm not super familiar with how our current program works, but I wanted to address this one because someone had commented around the, kind of lack of like a measurable outcome, which we'll definitely get into if we keep this as a strategy moving forward as we think about implementation. But any thoughts on potential other ways to refine this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it would be like understanding its efficacy, and like, yeah, it's more about like evaluate the adopt a tree program, and like, and engage with community around how it's used. Where is it used? I have a feeling I know many of the neighborhoods where it's used.
It's not just a feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's the thing, is like evaluate the program, and like assess its usefulness. I don't know, that's like a bad word, but like,
No, but just, I mean, I think be mindful of what role and slice of expanding tree canopy it occupies, right? I mean, it's a lovely thing for people that own homes, and they can get trees and they don't cost a lot, and that's great, lovely. But it's like that compared to the work that we need to do, and I think sometimes it's like, oh, this is right. So,
Okay.
yeah. Anyhow.
Cool. I think that's a good refinement there. So then the last one, at least in terms of ones that I specifically wanted to call out for us to think about, is row 32. This actually came from San Antonio, and I wanted to just put it out there to see what you all think. Analyze and quantify the urban heat island impact. Essentially, there are many other cities that have a specific urban heat island reduction plan. We kind of have that built into other strategies here. Are there other elements missing potentially? Do we want to explore a strategy that's specifically around creating an urban heat island reduction plan? What do you all think?
I think there are things that are missing here that would be in an urban heat island plan, right? And it's not just mitigating the effects of neighborhoods that are hotter than others, like trying to cool them, but also responding to the hotter temperatures. Like there's nothing in here about like the distribution of cooling stations kind of in the city, and how they're, where they're located and how they're powered and how they're operated when they're open, that kind of thing. Like the shaded bus stop things that Jeremy, you talk about, like that would be in an urban heat island, could be in an urban heat island plan. It's not really anywhere in here right now.
Yeah, and then like I mean, there's just like overall surface heat island and air temperature heat island as well. So like there's what you see looking down from space, like the albedo of the city versus the air temperature that people experience. And so those have different reduction strategies at different scales. So, I think a strategy would be, formalizing heat readiness and urban heat reduction would be one of the things that we could do.
And I will say, between our last meeting and now, we did identify the sort of social resilience / response aspect of climate threats as a gap in our strategies, just generally. And so with the community working group, we started to address that in terms of like, public health, social services, so cooling stations, all of that is sort of being considered there. This could be a potential place where that all comes together with the physical side too. So I like the idea of keeping that as having that be a strategy that we move forward with, at least for now.
Yeah, y'all hosted the social infrastructure Chicago heat wave talk film on Friday, right? Wasn't that?
Yes.
Sustainability up?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about, and trying to think about which of the things that was happening there are already addressed. And I think having a plan, it'll be a Venn diagram, right? A lot of the things that we're talking about will work towards this, but necessary, not sufficient.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we have now gone through the strategies that I have highlighted. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should not go through the other ones here. Oh no, something got deleted. But what I do want to do is sort of transition us a little bit to the next part of the activity where we will still go through each of the strategies. And what we're going to be thinking about with these, I'm just going to scroll over, is our equity screening tool. And the questions that we want to ask in this part of the process, and it doesn't have to be at the specific strategy level for some of these where we kind of like muddled things up a little. But are there places where these strategies address these 4 community priorities: community wealth, affordable housing, beautiful and safe neighborhoods, and health, physical and mental? If so, let's say how. And if not, let's look for those opportunities to do so. I'm going to let you all just think really quickly about that while I try to figure out what was in this cell before so that we do not lose a strategy.
Might have just gotten bigger.
Yeah, what is 140? I can find it. All right, y'all look at that. Oh, Jeremy, yes, to your point about drought, I think that's super relevant for for this group. We and also on the water resilience side, which is objective 3, that's also looking at drought, but more on the water conservation side. So, efficiency of our water treatment plant, drought, sort of water conservation incentives, things like that. We have a couple of specific strategies that we haven't talked about yet related to plantings and planting drought tolerant species. But I think to your point, as far as planning for like drought, that is a big, it's happening on a regional scale through the hazard mitigation plan update for the Richmond Region Planning Commission or something. But if there's anything that appears to be missing here related to drought, feel free to, chime in. And I apologize, I'm still looking for this missing strategy so that we can make sure to address that. But for now,
No, it's okay. I mean, that's like, it was just like the fact that like, yeah, we're not talking about drought in these strategies, but like, yeah, it's the fact that it's so regional. And, I mean, we did have something come up the other day or last summer where it was like the governor almost, restricted water use, but that's at such a larger scale than the city that it seems like only the best thing to do would be like invest in, some sort of, water harvesting opportunities or something, and that also allows for, but yeah, anyway, we don't need to dwell on that, but
yeah.
Emergency related water scarcity things, it's like more so than like prepare the soil for, overdraft or something, and anyway.
Yeah. I don't even know what you're talking about, but we do have some stuff related to that in objective 3 on the water harvesting too. Okay, so let's get started on this equity tool conversation. So we can just think for the purposes of this first one, let's just think generally about sort of urban forestry, master plan, expanding tree canopy, and just go across the columns here. So related to jobs access, any existing sort of connections there that we want to call out, and or any opportunities that we could bring in around that, knowing that we have this other strategy down here that is all about jobs, on like maintenance and training and skills building and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to put yes here, but any specific things we want to call out related to trees?
I mean, as distinct from the other one, I'm not, I'm not sure.
Yeah. It would be like, maybe as an example, what should the urban forest master plan, and this is maybe getting too specific into implementation, but include a workforce development aspect to it specifically around, plantings, that sort of thing. But again, we
Plantings
don't.
and maintenance, right? Or is this just plantings in this one? No, this is maintenance in it too.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if this is the place, then yes, absolutely.
I can just put, this is sort of referenced to in the strategy below. Parker, did you get kicked out of your group or are you joining us? Oh, just let me know if you come on.
Or are you really here?
Yeah, are you a ghost?
Yeah, good.
Okay, any linkages you all see or potential linkages to affordable housing and trees? I know there's.
This is complicated because it's the master plan, right? You know, I mean, we've got public and private home ownership, I mean, land kinds of things, right? So, I mean, maybe there's a call out that talks about affordable housing is important, and it's important that it have trees, right, and green space as it's being built, right? I mean, that's not often. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if this master plan is just about the construction of the writing of the plan, right? Then actually the jobs, I guess, are in the people doing the writing, right? Or like, and it doesn't really writing a plan doesn't really affect housing, but then.
Right, it's the difference between the writing and the what's in, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's a little more. And I'm gonna do an Alicia because this ain't the last touch on this, right? So, I mean, I think as long as we're pointing to the things, we can figure out where they live.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I did want to bring up related to this is to see if y'all have any thoughts on how trees can impact property values in terms of increasing them. Is there anything potentially to consider here around green space and trees more generally, and and I don't know if gentrification is the right word, but just not letting that be something that potentially increases the problem, I'll say.
Yes.
Okay. And if that, we might not know how to address that at this point, but it's at least something we don't want to exacerbate. Like that is maybe where we're at right now with this thinking, So feel free to keep thinking about the housing, but I do want to.
The same lens, it reduces heating and cooling. It reduces like cooling costs and stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh, not heating costs. Ugh. Okay. And then just to keep us moving, there's definitely clear connection with everything that we're talking about and beautiful and safe neighborhoods, because one of the things that we heard from the community specifically with this priority was they want more access to green space, they want more trees, all of that. So I think we could literally just put a yes down the whole column here for our entire working group. But how about health?
You're kidding, right?
Nope. You gotta tell me. I'm not making.
Yes, I mean we're increasing tree canopy, decreasing pervious pavement so that the heat island effect is mitigated and people don't die of heat stroke and asthma. So, I mean, as one axis along which that's happening.
Right. Yeah.
And mental health should be included here too. Sorry, John.
I was just going to say I had to jump off, and I'm sorry I wasn't very helpful today. I'm not feeling.
No, you were great, John. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me be here, and keep up the good work. See you soon.
Thanks.
Take care.
All right. So I think we can probably apply that sense of thinking. I definitely want to get into, we have about 20 minutes and I want to make sure we get to the second, the new objective. So I think just based on the general category of strategies we're talking about, we're probably safe to say yes on the neighborhood, beautiful and safe neighborhoods as well as health piece. So maybe we can go through a little bit here and think about specific opportunities for things like job development, training, access, that sort of thing, as well as housing. So we kind of talked about that already with the trees and green space pieces. I'm thinking about where else we might want to consider, what other topics we've covered we might want to talk about. Oh, here's that strategy, Rob. Create a citywide definition of quality green space or other.
There we go.
There we
Okay.
go. We have depaving.
I mean, there's work. I mean, we're looking at work in all of these areas, honestly.
Mhm.
I mean, once it's legal to do, I mean, who's gonna do it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so, RVA 2050 with an equity focused lens, we could say how important it is that job creation in these areas be focused on, parts of the community that haven't had access or that might have been impacted as far as a first whack and a first bite.
Mhm.
And I'm going to say a terrible thing, but welcome to my world. I mean, it's the difference between hiring folks who have the skills already and work for $2 an hour less that come in from other places to get everything built in our town versus taking the time to build those skills up in existing folks, right? I mean, so the easiest and the cheapest way is not always the best way, right? And I think as a nation, we're learning that lesson really slowly. But if we're using an equity focused lens, let's be clear about how we're trying to create jobs and wealth in the mitigation process that also goes towards mitigation of the impacts that have come as a result of poverty and lack of access to opportunity.
Mhm. I think that's great, Rob, just as a general, for all of these things.
And sometimes you just got to get it done, right? I mean, I get that, but sometimes if you're creating a strategy, why not create a strategy that's pointed?
Mhm. And you, just to make sure, you muted yourself, Rob. I just wanted FYI. Okay. Any other? So let's wrap up this objective while we still have a little bit of time left. But any other thoughts on the housing component of this and what the strategies we've talked about?
I think there's lots of interactions between housing and tree canopy, right? As we talked about. And I like how you put that, Brian. You got to be mindful of the fact that it could potentially drive both private trees on people's properties and neighborhood trees could kind of drive up property values in ways that you need to be cognizant of. I'm not sure about the depaving, like how that affects affordable housing. I don't know. Can't really think of an interaction there. Nothing really.
Oh, you've been to Gilpin?
Yeah. So how's that?
So at some point in the next 10 or 15 years, there will be no Gilpin, right? What replaces it will have much less impervious surface than what's there now, right? So, I think that finding ways to decrease impervious surface and increase urban greenery is a partial driver for how affordable housing happens, doesn't happen, et cetera, right? So, I mean, that's,
So the same way as trees. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I get your point.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just to make sure we get to it. So you all will have access to this after this if you would like to add anything else. I think we have a great start here. I do want to move us on to our potentially new objective 4. And I'm hoping you all can help me with this one. So we had a couple
where's
of
Jeremy?
I know, I'll get together with him on like the technical aspects of this. But we did have a couple of comments sort of along the way around the natural environment's ability to obviously improve air quality and also to, I don't know if I'm using the right terms here, capture, sequester carbon and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions overall. And so what I did here was took some of those comments, but most of these actually come from other cities. And these were just ideas that I saw the other cities were putting into their climate action plans. Since we don't have a ton of time, we can just run, you know, if y'all just want to read through this real quick and let me know if any of these stand out as like, if you even know if these might be something we might want to look at. I think I probably need to do some additional research here on how this process sort of works and how to make these into actual strategies. But that's the last thing I wanted to do for today.
I'd say you're pointing in the right direction. I would say distribution of sources of air pollution is very, very different than carbon sequestration.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you want to look at that. Todd, do you know this stuff, right? The sequestration stuff.
A little bit.
Yeah. So let's
We're
real quick.
lumping them together in this. You're attempting to lump them together in this objective, right? Is that
Yeah, and maybe that's not appropriate. Like I just wasn't really sure what to do with these two topics. So I'm wondering if potentially the sources of air pollution, could that be more related to like our buildings and energy working group? I have no idea. In terms of like what their outputs are and mitigating some of that, or the other possibility is, do we implement natural strategies to help with those air pollution sources? And maybe that's something we put somewhere. And then there's the sequestration piece. So we can go whichever way y'all would prefer to go in terms of discussion.
It looks like the top one is an air quality, air pollution one, and the rest is sequestration ones, right?
Yeah.
So I think the top one is, I don't know if it's a strategy, right? But if it's specific enough, but I think it's an important consideration to have. The distributions, industrial traffic, like is a huge thing to think about. Where the buses idle, like all that kind of stuff, and think about, and then come up with policies for new sightings of new industry. Come up with, work with the Department of Transportation for their
Brianne, can I ask a
road
question?
networks a bit, but also for this the city on their kind of public transportations, a bit like how their bus routes are and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry, I didn't want to cut Todd off, but if I think I'm understanding maybe what you're trying to get at here is trying to be more localized with the planting of trees in terms of connecting them to the sources of pollution, if there are point sources versus non-point sources of pollution in the community. And I'm just wondering if that's just more another consideration that goes into where we plant trees. So in other words, up in the strategies on trees, whether it's trees on public or private property, thinking about, where we were either prioritizing areas with less tree canopy coverage, or that it just is another consideration for where trees are planted. Is that, and the other piece is some of the things that Todd was talking about, those are a lot of things that have been talked about in the other working groups like transportation and buildings for mitigation. But it seems like that you were trying to get to that.
Yeah, I mean, the question, right? So, I mean, I'm assuming that the other working groups have something around distribution of point source, right? Pollution kinds of things, right? I mean, they're concentrated here. Is there a way to sort of do that?
Yeah, that's why I kept this in here, frankly, because I didn't see that from the other working groups. And honestly, we've just been moving so quickly the last like week.
Well, I mean, so there's two different things in here. And I think that we need absolutely to be paying attention to point source air pollution from industry and its distribution in the city of Richmond, right? Number one, boom. We need to understand that, be clear about that. Then when it comes to mitigation, you've got two sort of different avenues, right? One is reduce and redistribute point source pollution, right? Decrease idling and concentration and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that'll get us, you know, in trouble with all the trucking companies and stuff, but that's okay. And then the other question is, can we use the natural environment in those places where we can't decrease or do anything? Can we use the natural environment to do a better job of mitigating that stuff, right? And I think it's beyond trees, because I think some of the, and this is Todd, I'm gonna push this onto you in a minute, but I mean, if we're doing a better job in carbon sequestration, like per square foot or whatever with our plantings, does that in turn do anything around what's coming out via transpiration and the, you know, making the air quality better, et cetera, et cetera? Are we getting anything? I don't know the answer to that.
There's a tricky interplay with the trees and air quality, right? Because the trees do emit some particular kind of matter pollution when they're kind of photosynthesizing and stuff like that. And so you do have actually some spikes in areas of high vegetation cover, some pollution spikes. So that's something that needs to be, that's not a straightforward story in answer to your question, Rob, like that we're gonna, by planting trees, sequester carbon and automatically clean up all of our other pollutants that are.
And are trees the only thing that do that as far as plantings are concerned? I mean,
we have the aquatic sequestration. I saw that was in one of the other cities, and I think Bryce or somebody else commented on, like, I don't think the river does that much sequestration.
Yeah, someone commented, and I was like, I just don't know, so we can take that off.
No, I mean, I'm wondering about like other things that are other kinds of plants that are, I mean, trees are big plants, right? And they do a heavier lift, but I just don't know if, you know, planting fields of native grasses and flowers next to, you know, the trucking companies, whether that does any good.
Or legumes that are pulling nitrogen out of the air or something like that. Yeah,
right.
That's a good point.
I don't know, but it's worth, I mean, it feels like that's what this is pointing at, is two things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's assuming that the spatial, and you put that really well, Rob. I thought that the first thing is that there is this spatial distribution of point sources, and if that's being addressed somewhere else, that's great. But I think that probably should.
But if it's not, then
right.
Thank you. Because we've heard it. I mean, we've heard it in our group, right? I mean, we've heard it a couple times. It's like, it's all the, you know, in addition to the heat being concentrated, so is a lot of the point source stuff, mm-hmm. right?
And you probably do get, like, if you have like schools and you have particulate matter that's being kicked up by like either from cars or from dusty roads or something like that, and you have some sort of vegetative buffer between that road and the school, that's probably a great thing, right? And we should think about concentrating our plantings to do those kinds of things. I think that would be something to think about.
Okay, so I'm wondering, so I think two things on two, like, sort of thoughts to where to take that particular strategy next is the reason I included the distribution of sources here is because I wanted to make sure at the very least that the other working groups were incorporating that as some sort of consideration or something. So that'll be on our end internally. Then there's the solution side and the sort of natural solutions, which I think could eventually become a strategy for this working group. Then so that, if we can just take the next couple of minutes that we have together, the last couple of minutes, on the carbon sequestration end, Todd, would it be like, do you know enough about that to maybe work if I like had a meeting with like you and Jeremy and we could like hash out some specific strategies here? Or do you know, maybe we could think about other people in the community who maybe are knowledgeable in this area, just because this is probably the place where I can definitely do some research on what other cities are doing, but as far as the technical part, I am just not sure what specifically would work for a community like Richmond that doesn't have, for example, a lot of open agricultural land to do carbon farming. So any thoughts on that?
I'd be happy to work with you on that. It's not necessarily an expertise of mine, but I can definitely or think of other people to kind of pull in as well. These you drew from other plans, because I would start there too, like look at other cities.
Yeah, which is another, and I'm happy to look at number 70.
Yes,
that's like right in our lane. But
yeah, so actually most of these were from Oakland. So what I can do is I can just circle back, just because I'll circle back with you guys and Jeremy, just with where they
69 and 70, right?
Yeah, they both came from Oakland, and Oakland also is doing some sort of aquatic sequestration, something with the Bay Area, something.
But
so
just as we're talking, remember, I mean, Oakland doesn't have that much carbon farming, right? Open land either, right? Yeah. So I'm not sure that that's a requisite for being able to do this. Now, whether it moves needle or not, that's a different, right? I mean, that's a different question, but
that's true. Okay, great. So I'll follow up on that piece and do a little bit more research to see. These examples were just from the plans that we had sort of collected over the last year or so. So it's just a few cities, but I think there are probably other cities.
I mean, Jeremy's about to do a piece of that at the Science Museum, but we're also about to be looking at an urban garden to an urban mini farm in Hillside, and are going to be looking at some of the same. Are there soil amendments and treatments that you can do that will increase what the sequestration rate is from this piece of land to that piece of land, right? So
you all,
Rob,
is that good? Oh, go ahead.
Todd?
Rob, you're not from Oakland, are you? Is that?
No, I know people and have been there.
Okay.
Sorry, Brian.
I'm from New York. Don't tell.
You're good.
We don't have a lot of farmable land either.
Yeah, so I'm closing the breakout rooms so that we can wrap up. The rest of the group will be joining in a minute. But I really appreciate you guys sticking it out with me on these two objectives. Any last thoughts while we have our small group together?
I mean, if you're going to the equity screening tool, I mean, I think that there's absolutely on 69 and 70, there's certainly an opportunity for community wealth building as we look at that. And I mean, it's yeah, I mean, it's interesting in terms of affordable housing, depending on for whom the whole notion of creating food growing opportunities for people, right? I think is very real. And that I think it would hit the beautiful shady neighborhoods piece, and I can't remember what the last one is in my so anyhow, that's what I got.
Cool. Okay. Everybody should be rejoining, so I'm going to share my slides again and we will wrap up. All right. I think, is this everybody? Yeah, looks like everybody who's made it this far with us. So thank you all so much for your hard work. I know that was a lot. For each objective, we have so much great content under each of our objectives now, and I really appreciate your feedback and all of the work that you've done. So just to wrap up in the next few minutes, I will follow up with an email after this, sharing the spreadsheet that you all worked on with your facilitator during today's breakout rooms. If you'd like to continue providing any kind of comments either on the spreadsheet or you just want to email me, whatever way is easier for you, I'm happy to also have a one-on-one, especially where there were maybe some topics that need some additional follow-up. So keep adding to that. We are going to be moving pretty quickly into taking what came out of today's meeting, as well as the other working groups that are meeting this week, and cleaning everything up to go to city staff and department leadership, as well as the roundtable for review next week. So if you do have comments or anything, please let us know, ideally by the end of this week, so we can incorporate those. But this will not be the last time you see this content. This will not be the last time that we're working on this together. So still draft at this point. Our next meeting is in a few weeks on the 22nd at 1 p.m. We're back to our regular time. For now, if anyone would like to share updates, upcoming events, either in the chat or feel free to speak up. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and put the feedback survey into the chat for anyone who would like to take that now. Any events going on in the community that we could share with the rest of the group? Or is everybody preparing to do tons of stuff in April? I know we are.
Where's your feedback survey in the chat? I don't see it.
I just put the link in. Let me put it
Okay.
there. Oh, no, I didn't do that right. Okay, do you see it, Mary? If not, I'll include it. I can also include it in the email.
Okay. Let's go to the email.
It popped in. It's that if you click on it, it shows
What
up.
is HTTPS?
Yep,
GLE?
exactly.
Yeah, if you double click on that, it'll just pop up a new window in your screen.
Okay. Well,
Awesome. Well, if no one has any updates or anything they want to share, feel free to take our feedback survey and sign off, and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you all in a few weeks. Thank you all so much.
Everybody, thanks.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.